Hi, it's Tony Robbins. Welcome to another edition of the New Money Masters, our sessions with the masters of marketing. Once again, looking at giving you the best answers from people that have done it. And I'm very excited today to introduce you to John Reese. John is a legend in internet marketing. He's done something that no one had done before. He was the first man in history to do $1 million in less than 24 hours. It just expanded the game. It's the equivalent of the 4-minute mile in this industry. And but I want you to really get a chance to meet him as a man, see his journey, and see how he built to that level. And now he dwarfs that on a regular basis. Pretty humble guy and a good man. John, great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tony. Appreciate it.
Listen, I like to start out. People hear about what you've done in the industry, and you're legendary in what you've done, and you're pretty damn cool in the way you treat with people about it. You're real humble, but I think it's great to see how people started and how they got there. So we always start these out by just kind of getting a little background. I know you grew up in a family where your dad was an engineer, so you're around computers most of your life, and pretty nurturing family, it sounds like. As I understand, in high school, though, when you were a kid, you were already selling to other kids, right? Selling candy, is that right?
Right, yeah.
And how old were you when that was going on?
Like 9 or 10 years old.
Literally, you're figuring out how to make money by selling candy to your friends?
We're trying to make money. I don't know if I made much money, but yeah, I was.
The spirit.
I just had that fire inside me to just kind of hustle and do stuff to try to make money. It was fun. I just liked it.
And then in high school, you were studying direct marketing. Is that true? You're kind of looking at those things?
Yeah, I think that eventually became part of the progression of me as kind of my business journey. I think it started when I was really young. A few things happened for me. When I was a kid, I used to watch a lot of sports with my father. And one of the big turning points for me was when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was watching the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on TV because we're from Florida.
Right.
And I remember watching TV and watching these football games with my father and saying, asking about, the game and different things about it. And I asked my dad, I was like, what college is that, Dad? What school is that? Because my dad went to University of Florida, and so we always watched Gator football games together. And he had to explain to me that it wasn't a school, that it was actually a professional team, and that it was pretty much a business.
Right.
And I remember asking him, I was like, well, Dad, who owns that team?
Right.
And he was like, well, the owner happened to be Hugh Culverhouse at the time, the guy who founded the team, and he was a billionaire and a very rich man. And I was like, wow. I was like, Dad, do you think ever that I could ever own that team? And my dad was like, sure, if you worked hard enough, anyone could.
Wow.
And that was a real kind of turning point for me thinking about money and making money. Because I remember also used to, driving down the road in the car with my parents and, and asking my parents, who owns that? Who owns that?
Your family was more middle class?
Yeah, middle class.
Right.
We had 3 kids in the family, and
Sure.
so, we'd go on, trips to Disney World or wherever.
Sure.
But I remember just, going down the street in the car and seeing, like a Wendy's,
Yeah.
or, any other restaurant or any other type of store, and I'd always ask, who owns that? Where does that come from?
Wow.
And, and when I realized that it was just someone that decided to start the business and just, do it for themselves, that it was a very powerful thing for me to associate with at an early age, that anyone could basically start anything.
And create something that could last and become something
Absolutely.
huge.
No one was kind of anointed from birth the right to be in business.
Right.
That they were just in business because they wanted to be.
Yeah.
So at an early age, I wanted to be in business.
Yeah.
And so I tried all different things, tried selling candy and things like that. Well, by the time I got into high school and I was really thinking about what kind of business I'd really want to start and grow, I traded baseball cards and done all kinds of things up until that point. But when I really got serious about building a company, when I started thinking on that level, I've always been a very strategic thinker, and I think genetically I get it from my father, who was an engineer.
Sure.
And so I always, analyze things. I like to plan things and write things out on paper. And I was thinking about it strategically back then, of what would be the ultimate business for me. And I thought about the different types of businesses and retail stores and all these things, and all the different options that were out there. And so I thought about having a retail store, dry cleaners or anything else. But I learned that you'd pretty much be limited to the business that you could do in that store by the people that lived in the area.
Right.
And so one of the great things I learned about at that time was like the mail order industry, and about like direct marketing, where you could place ads in magazines, on TV, wherever, and sell things to people anywhere in the world, let alone anywhere just in your own state or your own city or even, of course, your own country.
Right.
So I started studying mail order at an early age. I was probably about 14, 15 years old, 16
So there was
years
no
old.
web at that stage, obviously.
No. There was no web at all.
Yeah.
So I started studying that stuff. Like many other people, I was very ambitious and saw a lot of these ads for, this will make you rich, buy my book and this will make you rich, or this business in a box or franchise thing or whatever else. And I bought into all kinds of stuff, even at an early age. I took probably $3,000 or $4,000 that I had made trading baseball cards during a whole summer, and I invested in some, business stuff that was supposed to make me money, and it didn't make me anything. And then by the time I turned 18 and discovered the wonderful world of credit cards, that changed my business life because I say that, kind of tongue in cheek, because that allowed me to rack up a lot of debt.
Right.
But I was buying into all these different things, and one of the things I did at that time was I think I bought like kind of reprint rights, licensing rights to some information about like real estate investing and business management, or starting your own small business, and stock trading, and I tried to sell those things through mail order by placing ads and doing things. And
Did you make any money on it?
I didn't. I wouldn't call it. Wouldn't be called a profit. I got some sales to come in.
Okay.
And I still remember to this day, placing an ad. It was a two-step process. I'd place an ad. I'd have someone write me for more information. They'd send me a postcard or a letter, and then I would send them out this printed sales letter with a brochure and order card and a return envelope. Same thing, the kit that I had bought, just using their stuff.
Right.
And just talking about my life, since we're talking about this stuff, I just really remember the day that the first postcard came in through the mail when someone was writing me for more information. That, to me, that's one of my favorite days of my life. And of course, one of the other favorite days.
Because you were in business at that point, really.
Yeah, and it validated that, hey, this works.
Yeah.
Or this is at least the first step of the process.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the next amazing thing that happened about a month later was when I opened my P.O. box and I saw this red pre-printed envelope that was addressed to me, because I knew that's what they send in when they send in the check for $15 to buy the little reports.
Right.
And that was making my first sale. And that was, I remember opening that drawer and seeing it and closing the drawer and like looking around me, walking away, locking it, walking away, and coming back in to experience it again. I did it like 10 times. It's almost embarrassing to say this.
Wow.
But I walked back, I turned the key, and I pulled out and I looked
But how
just to
cool
see
is
it
that?
again.
The level of excitement,
yeah,
like a
it
little
was.
kid at Christmas time.
It was just amazing for me.
Now, your first moment of knowing, though, because everybody has that time where it starts to click, where they start to go, this is it for me. That was this is it emotionally.
Yes.
But didn't you have a time, I think we were talking earlier, you were saying that there was a stage in which the internet came into play, where these mail order skills, so tell me about that.
So I went from that, of doing these two-step ads, wasn't making any money, whatever, but I was just doing this process.
Right.
And what kind of got me into that process, which I think is important to say, I'll say it real fast, let me ramble here. So one day when I'm in college, I'm looking at magazines and seeing all these ads in the back of magazines where it's saying, write for more information, this free kit and all this stuff. So I stayed up all night, hand wrote 300 letters to the advertisers to get this more information. And over the course
So you'd see what everybody was doing.
Yeah, and over the course of 2 months, I got all this mail, and I got all, solved their whole process. So that began my process of reverse engineering things. I was like, wow, well, this is what they send when they write to you. So I started doing that for myself and placing the ads.
So you took 300 people, saw what they saw that were successful.
Yes.
So you looked for ads that had been running for some time, correct? Successful ads.
Well, these were just any ads that happened to be
ad.
in this magazine.
Okay, and then you saw what they did, saw the process, and then said, I'm going to apply this and build my own process.
Right, where I just wanted to see what happens. I was like, what are all these people doing, asking people to write for more information? What are they selling? I don't even understand it.
Wow.
So I wrote to all those people for more information, got all of their marketing materials, and learned. I connected the dots between they have the little ad, they get people to write, they send the stuff in the mail, and then they expect you to get all excited about the materials, desiring what they have to sell, send in the order form to get the thing. So I bought rights to be able to do this myself to, one of these products that I had already described there, getting that envelope and the thing. And
Right.
so I was doing this at the time, not making any money, spending a lot of money on advertising, racking up debt at this point. And I had always been into the online world. I was into computers at a very early age, since I was probably 6, 7 years old. Before people even had personal computers, my father was bringing home these systems that no one else would ever have in their home because of work. And so I got exposed to them at an early age. Well, in the early 80s, when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, BBSs, I don't know if you remember those, the bulletin board systems with the modem and the phone and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Those took off. I used those playing games and such. Well, by the time college period hit, 5, 6, 7 years later, the online services started building up.
CompuServe, AOL.
Yeah, CompuServe, America Online, Prodigy. So around 89, 1990, I was in college, and I happened to be on CompuServe poking around, and I saw that CompuServe had like this classified ad section. And I was like, wow, I wonder if anyone's actually paying attention to these little ads online like they were in the back of magazines.
Right.
So the ads were free to play. So I actually placed an ad on CompuServe and actually had people write me for more information in the regular mail, because I didn't even have an email address then. Not many people used email back then anyways. So I did that, and sure enough, it was just astonishing that somebody sent for more information after seeing the little classified ad on CompuServe.
And you paid nothing for it.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Your magazine, you would have had to pay for it.
Exactly. So that was a huge breakthrough for me mentally. I knew at that point that the online stuff was going to have the greatest impact on marketing than probably anything before it.
Why?
Well, one, because of the cost.
Right.
You know, of course, there could maybe end up being popular paid versions of that. But the biggest thing for me was speed. The problem with the direct mail and kind of mail order industry was, you know, you'd buy an ad in a magazine, even a $100 classified ad that would run in 1 or 2 issues, and you'd sit around and wait 3 or 4 months for the issue to come out to see if it would work or not. So this, you were literally placing, you get a result in an hour.
Right.
And I was just like, from a testing standpoint, knowing that it was all about
the whole process
it's
of
all going to be
learning
about the
like
math, the return, right? Spend X, get X in response, Y in conversion.
Right.
So I knew it. I knew in my mind, in my heart, that it was going to be huge. So I just got more and more involved in trying things online, those online services, and I bought into some more business products to try to sell and things like that.
Did you make any money?
I wouldn't call it a profit, Tony.
There's a theme here.
When you say made money, I made sales.
Well, but
I got some cash
you got
back.
some sales. So that was enough to reinforce you that even though you weren't earning a profit,
Right.
it was costing you money is the bottom line to be in business, right? But you got enough of a taste that it validated for you that it was real. You knew that there was an option, and you kept investing in courses. This is the part that blows my mind. I mean, I did the same thing, but most people just don't do this. You kept investing in what wasn't working. Why?
I don't know. I just, you know, because I think I was just an idiot, really.
No. Why, really? Why did you stick with it? Because most people give up when it doesn't work the first time. And you didn't work, but you found what did work, right? You said, well, I'm not making money, but I did do this. I did learn that. What made you keep going? Why did you have to keep pushing through till you finally succeeded?
Well, a few things. One, any progress at all, I knew. Like, if I got no response from it all, I would have abandoned at least that idea, that concept. But since some response came, even though it wasn't profitable, I just had the mindset of I just need to improve enough to make it profitable.
Just make it better.
Yeah, just to get it to work better.
Got it.
Because it was working, you know, in essence, kind of.
You never called it failure for you. It was just, this isn't good enough, and I'll make it better, and I'll make it better, and I'll make it better. So you kept having those iterations until you made it happen. But in the meantime, you accumulated on your credit cards $100,000.
Yeah,
how much debt did you accumulate?
Well, eventually with, let's back up for a minute. Because most people think, oh, $100,000 of credit card debt. Well, how could you have, you know, that kind of credit card debt, you know, being like in your early 20s? And I'd like to tell the story real quick because I think
I'm curious to know myself.
It's one of my most, I say this jokingly, one of my most amazing life accomplishments. So when I was in college, I'll give you just the short version of this. Roommate comes back in, opening his mail, and he's like, you know, he had a Visa card, and he was all excited about it. I just got this credit card with a $500 limit, or, you know, whatever it was. And I was like, oh, how'd you get that? I'm like, you know, you don't even have a job. You just came to school like me. And he's like, anyone can get a credit card. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, go to the student union. You'll see brochures for all these credit cards. And everyone I know is like, they'll just give you a credit card. I'm like, oh, well, can you get more than one? He's like, no. He's like, I tried. You know, and they rejected me saying I already had, you know, credit and that it was too much of a risk, whatever else. And I was like, oh, that's too bad. Well, about an hour passed, a little light bulb went off in my evil scheming head. And I was like, well, what if I just sent in all the applications on the same day where I didn't have any credit yet? How would they know who's about to give me credit?
Oh, my God.
So you know, in hindsight, it was kind of, you know, reckless. Yes.
But you were looking for
capital.
But
I may not be where I am
business
today if I didn't have that access to capital. So I sent them all in on the same day.
How many?
I think it was like 13 or 14.
Wow.
And I immediately had access to probably, I think it was about $20,000 in credit lines. And I was like 18 years old, didn't have a job, nothing.
And we wonder why we in the financial debacle we did,
so
right?
I'm not proud of that, but it is part of the process.
But it gave you leverage.
Right, so I used some of the money and then paid some of it back with some of the sales, and then they, of course, they made the mistake and gave me more credit.
Sure.
And then, but ultimately, I kept buying into courses, I kept buying get-rich-quick stuff. I just kept buying stuff because I was like, I'm going to find the way.
Right.
You know, so I see other people driving, you know, I was always ambitious about, you know, wanting to have nice cars, and I was always a sports car fan, so I saw these other people driving Ferraris and things, you know, small percentage of people, but some of them, and I was like, I'm going to figure out how people get to that point in building wealth.
Now, I want to just interject. most people just don't have that relentlessness, right? They try something and they stop, or they try a few things, or they go, God, I'm too far in debt. But one of the most important things, I think, for anybody who's in business today is when the economy got really tough, who are the people still standing? Weren't the people that it was easier for. It's the people who have this mindset that said, I am not going down. I'm going to take advantage of this time. That psychology seems to have been a critical factor in your success later on when you didn't just make it through it, but you started breaking records. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I always had this mindset of like, I have to push myself to the edge of destruction almost, and I won't stop until I do.
Right.
Because I'm like, I always say this, just jokingly amongst friends, if you were dumb, how would you know?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I at least kind of thought I was somewhat smart.
Good one.
Maybe it's because of my parents telling me that I was a smart kid or whatever else.
Right.
But I thought, you know what? I'm smart enough that a lot like these other people with wealth
Yeah.
that are making money, that I've got to be able to do it too.
Right.
And so I just had that belief from an early age. And I never wanted to work for someone else because I like to do problem solving. That's how my mind worked.
Right.
I like to reverse engineer things. I like to figure things out. And I knew working for someone else, I probably wouldn't get that opportunity because someone else would be kind of the leader and just telling me what to do. And so working for someone else for me was never an option. It was the dream for my mother, who was very conservative, but for me it wasn't. And so I just got that belief at an early age that my life is not going to end up that way, and just refused to allow it to happen.
We talked earlier about how intense that belief, though, was for you. It's almost like you wouldn't willing to live any other way. Is that true?
Absolutely. There was not an option for me.
Yeah.
There was no fallback option.
Right.
I dropped out of college with like a year and a half to go. And I mean, at first my mother was just, livid. She was just like, you're making the biggest mistake in your life, It's,
Yeah.
and other people told me that too.
Right.
But I knew in here somewhere that I would just look back at it like today in this interview and just laugh at that decision because it was one of the best things I ever did. For me personally, I don't recommend it for other people, but everyone has their own path, but for me.
Well, there's a certain amount of when you have to succeed, you do. When you can succeed or you'd like to succeed, it doesn't usually sustain. And there's the old phrase that, if you want to take the island, you burn the boats, and you certainly did that. So you burned your boats, you got $100,000 in credit card debt.
Yeah, it was like $107,910 was the worst of it.
Okay, so we were talking, off camera here. The biggest piece for you was facing that. Like, what turned you around? What finally turned you around?
Well, the reason why I know that exact number is because, at this point, and at this point in my life, I was about to turn 23 years old, $100-some thousand in debt at that point. I basically had destroyed my health. I was going every other night without sleep for 3 months.
Just because you were stressed or you're working, or?
Yeah, just stressed and working so many hours and just not taking care of myself and just,
Right.
And so I was just, that was the lowest of low for me. Like I was depressed, almost suicidal. I actually got to a point in my life at that time where I wasn't suicidal to the point where I was actually going to do something to myself, but I got to the point where I recognized what people think about and go through when they go through it.
Right.
I got that low. And I remember the day in my life that was the worst. My sister and a friend picked me up to go to Subway. I used to love to eat, back then and stuff. And they were gonna, they knew I was broke and I didn't have any money, and they were gonna buy it for me. And I was like, oh, that's great. And I was sitting in the car in the back seat. And I was so depressed. When we got there, I was so paralyzed with just anxiety of my situation that I refused to get out of the car and never even went in there and took advantage of that free meal that I wanted so bad.
Wow.
And I'll never forget that because that was the low. So,
I want people to get that because here's a guy who, in a few short years later, will make more than $1 million in 24 hours and go on to do that many, many, many more times. That's quite a transformation.
Yeah, literally
So
36 months after that.
it was 36 months later.
That's when I got a Porsche for the first time and just started doing anything I wanted, and I could almost buy anything I wanted.
So what happened? How did you go from there to 36 months later? What was the first turning point?
Sure. So the first turning point for me was one day. I'm literally, it was like 3 days after that Subway moment of depression. I'm in my room in my little apartment. I had roommates and things. I could, my cost of living was very low back then, of course. So that's the only way I could survive being in all this debt. I used my credit cards to pay my rent, but I was literally at the end of the road, right? But I was so depressed, and it was so bad. I just had to laugh at it. That's how bad it was. Wow. And so I used to get these credit card bills in from all this debt and just throw them in a huge box and throw it under my bed. And once I started missing one payment, I was like, what difference is 20 late payments going to make? I knew I had no credit then. I couldn't finance a stick of gum at that point. All the credit was gone. I wasn't getting more credit cards, and I had collectors calling. I mean, I was just a zero on the financial risk scale. I had nothing.
Yeah.
And so I would follow him on the bed. It was like out of sight, out of mind. And in hindsight, the turning point for me was realizing that that was the most ridiculous thing I ever did in my life, because I let that debt and fear control me for about 2 years as it reached that point. So one night in the middle of the night, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, I was just kind of depressed. I couldn't sleep. I wasn't feeling well. And I was just like, you know what? Screw all this. I was like, who cares? I'm like, let me laugh and see how pathetic my life really is. And I'm going to calculate to the penny how much debt I'm in. It was just a joke for me, how bad my life was at that point.
You pull the box out?
I pull the box out. I stay up all night calculating the computer in a spreadsheet, the latest credit card statements and how much I owed and everything else. And that's where that figure comes from. It was like $107,910. And I got that figure, and it was a very liberating moment for me to see that exact amount of debt. You know, and I think a lot of people that may be listening to this that maybe have some debt that they want to get rid of in their lives, they do the same thing. They don't want to face it.
Yeah.
You know,
thinking they'll be overwhelmed by it when they're actually overwhelmed right now because they don't know what it is. They just know it's huge.
Exactly. And so my students today, I teach them, the mantra I have is, in order to change your reality, you must face your reality.
So true.
And that's what happened on that night for me, which was a huge turning point for me building wealth. So when I figured that number out, I wrote it real big on a piece of paper and taped it on the wall that I would see every day. You know, most people think of taping their dreams on the wall, the car they want, the house they want. You know, people have, dream boards and things like that. But I was like, I'm going to face this number every day so I can't hide from it. And it was very liberating for me, because I realized once I saw the numbers, first of all, numbers are nothing to be afraid of. They're not going to reach out and stab me, or beat me up or anything. They're just numbers. And so I could look at the 107,000 and I started to build a plan for chipping away at it. And by knowing the number, I could reverse engineer it, because we talked about before the biggest
chunking it down, right?
The biggest mistake people make that want to make a bunch of money is when you ask them, well, how much do you want to make? And they say, well, as much as possible.
Or more than I have.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Either
well,
way.
Well, that doesn't exist. There's no, as much as possible is an amount. 100 million is an amount. 10,000 is an amount. So anyway, so facing that number really allowed me to start making moves and taking action to chip away at it. And of course, every $100 that came off it, every $500, when it finally got under 100,000 and got to 99,000, like just these breakthroughs that happened along the way. So that was a major turning point for me. And then, so at that point in time,
it gave you a sense of a little bit of control over your life again, instead of this invisible monster.
Absolutely. And I think
right?
that's why I was so depressed.
Right.
Is because it wasn't necessarily that I was in debt, it's because I had lost control.
Right.
And so from then on, I was in the online services. The internet started taking off. I was doing some little things, started making a little bit of money. My first profitable year online was while I was 23, almost 24 years old, and I made $6,500 in income that year. Now for me though, that doesn't seem like a lot of money, but for me it was a lot, because it paid, I had roommates, so it paid my cost of living, allowed me to live and support myself. But that was the first year of really making profit. Wow. And of course I was taking, there's probably 2 or 3 grand I could take and chip away at the credit card debt, even though the interest pretty much knocked it out.
Up, yeah, sure.
But so what happened with me then is I was involved doing, the internet really started taking off around 1994. The web really in 94, 95, 96 started taking off.
And how old would you have been then? 24?
I was 24 in 93, 94.
Got it.
So I guess almost 1995. So, but around that point in 94 and in 93, I discovered domain names, these .com names that everyone knows about today. And I looked at it, and just for whatever reason, I just realized, I just kind of looked at it like virtual real estate. I was like, wow, I was like, these names, someday someone's going to want to have the toys.com and the sports.com. And so I registered a few names with a little bit of money that I had left
and how
over.
much did it cost back then?
$100 per name.
$100
Because you had to register it for a minimum of 2 years, and it was $50 a year.
Wow.
And so I remember registering, like, I almost literally took the last $500 I had. I hate that sounds so cliche, but I spent my last dollar and that's when my life changed.
Yeah.
But at that point, I mean, I had other little things I was working on, selling some classified ad materials and making a few hundred here and there. But I took about $500 that I had freed up on one of the credit cards that I started paying down. I was like, here I go getting in debt again, but I really believed in this. And I registered a few names, that I had picked out and that I had realized that were available. Well, literally 3 days after I had registered these names, I had a guy contact me and say, I saw you just registered this certain name.
What was the name? I'm curious.
I can't mention the name because I had to sign non-disclosure to the contract when I sold it. Otherwise I would say what it was.
Was it a name of a company that existed?
No, it was a 4-letter generic term.
Okay, that's
yeah.
good.
That
now we're all sitting around guessing. Okay, 4-letter term.
That described a very large industry.
Okay, got it.
but I paid $100 for it. So this guy contacts me and he says, "Hey, I see you registered such and such." He's like, "I'll buy it from you for $1,000."
So you got a $900 profit like that.
Yeah, and so here I'm thinking, I'm thinking of all the, sales books I've read about negotiation and how to, go higher than you want. And I'm thinking if I ask for 5,000, and then part of my brain says, "You're an idiot. Just take the 1,000. Don't screw it up." Because $900 profit to me was the world back then.
Sure.
So I told the guy, "Yeah, okay, I'll sell it to you, whatever else." So, we did the deal. He wired me the money. And I was on cloud nine, man, because all my friends knew that I was like just a hermit in a cave working on the computer trying to make money. Yeah. Family knew I was in debt. Man, I bragged to everybody I knew. I just
made 900%.
I just made $900 profit in like 3 days. I told you I was going to be rich someday. I told you this stuff would work. And so I was on cloud nine for about a week while it was all going on. I was went to Subway a few times and celebrated. Had a great time. So about 10 days later. This guy calls me that bought the name, and he says, "Hey, John," he says, "can I get you to sign, I know it's after the fact when we did this deal for the $1,000, but can I get you to sign an agreement, I forgot to get you to do it, that basically just says that there were no copyright claims on that name, there's no tax liens, infringement, any lawsuits involved with it," which of course there wasn't any. Could I get you to sign that just to make the name free and clear so I can do whatever I want with it? I was like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." So I signed this thing, faxed it back, and so right after I faxed it, the guy calls me and he says, "Hey, John, thanks for faxing the agreement. Really appreciate it." He said, "I really have to tell you something, related to this name in our deal." He goes, "Otherwise, I kind of wouldn't be able to live with myself." And he said, "I wasn't buying your name for myself and to use it for my own business." He said, "I was actually buying the name and brokering it to a venture capital firm." And he said, "I just had to tell you, man." He said, "I sold the name for $1 million."
Oh my God.
And so
he had to live with himself. Did he give you any additional profit besides the 900?
No, he didn't.
He didn't give you a dime more?
No. And I don't blame him. He pulled it off. It was his money, had nothing to do with me.
So he made $1 million on a $1,000 investment.
He was selling it for $1 million before he even owned it and got it all lined up and then bought it. And just smart of him,
Wow.
Not good for me, at least emotionally.
But also give you such a hit.
So here's what I literally, Tony, I felt like I got kicked in the stomach. Here I felt, for quite a few years, I'm working hard. I'm doing everything I can. I believe in myself that I'm eventually going to be wealthy. I'm trying to do things ethically and morally, not trying to do things illegally.
Yeah.
I'm working hard. And here I use the analogy of I sold a winning lottery ticket for $1,000.
And what happened to you? Did you go back in depression for a while?
Yeah. So here's what happened. So I and I remember this vividly. Even though it was 15 years ago. So I sat in the room of my apartment with the lights out, literally for almost 3 days straight. Didn't eat, didn't come out, didn't shower, didn't do it, just sat there feeling sorry for myself. I cried a few times, and I thought like I blew it. This was my one chance of all the hard work I'd ever done, sending off to all those offers and ads and figuring out what people are sending and doing all these ad tests. And I was like, I blew it. This was my shot to be rich, and I blew it. And I just felt so sorry for myself, and the worst thing was my roommates would come by and knock on the door, "Hey, John, let's go spend some of that $900 that you made and celebrate some more." And I didn't have the heart. I couldn't tell anyone. For a while, I couldn't tell anyone what happened because I just felt so low at that moment.
Isn't it amazing what a meaning will do to us?
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You look at somebody's entire life, it's not the events of your life that controls you. Because the truth of the matter is you could have celebrated and went, "Well, shit, he was brilliant. I hadn't done it, but I made $900, right?" But instead, it hit you took you to your knees. How did you get out of it?
So after that 3 days towards the end, it was just like a light went on in my head, and it was just like a hammer hit me over the head or a frying pan. It was just like, stop feeling sorry for yourself. You need to look at this just like you analytically looked at the mail order stuff and all those tests. That every result, good or bad, is an asset.
Right.
That's what I learned from the ads I placed, even though it didn't make money. It wasn't a failure.
The value of the learning.
Yeah, that's what people should take away from this as well. Anything you do and spend money on or put your time into, even if it doesn't give you the result you want, it has incredible value. One,
if you learn from it.
Yeah.
If you just turn into a failure,
sure.
It doesn't, right?
One, you can learn to never do it again, right?
True.
But you can also learn from it. And if it gets any kind of result at all, you can learn. I learned to ask myself, why didn't it work? What could have made it work better? Why didn't people respond? So I thought about this, and I was like, I got to just learn from this. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to live and move on with my life.
Yeah.
And it just hit me. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I was like, how many English words are there, or how many words in the English language? How many other names could there be, these .com names? That was just one industry. And I'm like, if the guy did this deal and made that money, I could do other deals just like it. And I may never not make $1 million on one deal like he did, but I certainly could make a bunch of $1,000 deals even at a lower end.
Right.
And so I got up.
1,000 times 1,000, you got $1 million.
So at 4 o'clock in the morning, I got on my computer and I learned everything I could learn about domain names and that entire industry. When people registered them, if they got deleted for non-payment, where that data was stored, how it all worked. Are there any places online where people are buying and selling the names, or where value is estimated or projected for what some of these may be worth? What are the biggest industries in the world? Which ones have the highest lead generation costs? I just started studying, and literally within 2 or 3 weeks, I learned how to market the couple of the names I already had, 3 or 4 names I still had. I got a couple of other names. I used some of the 900 to get a few more names, and I was more proactive about it.
Right.
I contacted a few industries, say, I own this name, you're going to want it, this is going to be a big thing, and I sold them on Y. Sold it for, I think, $2,000.
Right.
And then I just slowly started doing more and more deals. I never did $1 million deal. The biggest deal I had was for about $250,000. I did a few deals that had stock involved that could have become something, never panned out. The dot-com bust happened and some of that. But it changed my life. I started making so much money.
By punching you in the stomach, which he wasn't. He was just trying to get his own profit.
Of course.
But by doing that, he showed you a light to a whole new business, to a whole new life, once you made that shift mentally, right?
And he didn't have to share that with me. He could have just, kept it to himself.
And if he hadn't, you would have just been happy and content and never have mastered. Because didn't you end up with like 40,000
I had
domains?
40,000 .com names at one point.
Wow.
I'm probably, as far as individuals go, there probably aren't, 10 people, 10 other people that ever had that many names at one point.
Wow.
Because even when domain registration came down to $10 a year, that's $400,000 you have to pay just to keep the names in registration fees.
Right.
So I just snowballed that business and made more and more money. And but that was a big turning point for me. That guy showing me the light that I need to learn. That if someone else is making the money, and this is a good segue into another great breakthrough for me. So. Talking about the mail order stuff, the direct marketing stuff, one of the things that I learned from just reading about these direct marketing masters and learning things was this thing I still teach today that people can do on the internet, and I'll give the example of how to do that for people watching this, is if you take a bunch of magazines, a bunch of issues from the same magazine, and you look at, let's say, January's issue, you have, January through June, you look at January, you look at all the ads, you look at all the ads again in June, the ones that are still running that were in January are the ones making money.
Sure. In order to be able to sustain themselves.
Yeah, unless they were just, had
burning cash,
deep pockets that they just wanted to lose money. But that's not how, most advertising is pretty strict how it's spent. So you could look at that and you could figure out which ads were working and then model after them.
Right.
To have a much greater head start than if you try to create something completely different.
Right.
Well, I learned that process. See, part of being an entrepreneur and being, most entrepreneurs are very creative people, almost artistic to a sense.
Right.
And the thing about entrepreneurs and people wanting to make money and start businesses is the fact that they think, I need to create this thing. I need to invent this thing that no one has ever come up with before. That thing that's going to be on infomercials or patented and bought by some company in China or whatever else. So people are in the invention mode. And I was in that mode. I was like, got to do something no one's ever come up with before. Otherwise, all the money's already been made. And I realized this was a major turning point for me, that that's the hardest way in the world to make money. The easier way to make money, the faster way to make money, is to simply open your eyes and to observe what I call a phase of discovery, monitor advertising, look at markets, see where others have already taken all the risks for you, where they're already spending money on advertising, where they've already tested different marketing, where they've already tested selling different products. Find out where the money is already flowing and get in front of it too.
So you're really saying this is like the opposite of what almost everybody thinks. Everybody thinks create your wealth, create the business, and your whole part is discover the business and don't take the risks. Almost all business before the internet, you had to take a certain amount of risk, right? You couldn't just...
Yeah, absolutely.
So now you're saying, look, you can just discover the pathway that's already proven and get in front of the major momentum that exists rather than taking the risk of hoping it works. In fact, I saw that you don't just discover, your next kind of state is you go work to validate that, as I understand, right? Let's talk about that, because if you're at home and the person at home is looking to get into business, there's two types of people are part of this series. Some people, they're not in business yet, and they're saying, I want a secondary income, or I want something that could give me freedom long term. I need to, I'm still got to keep my day job. Other people, they got their day job. It's the company they own, the small business, the medium, large size business. And they're here saying, God, the world's changed. The web has changed the world. and I'm working harder and harder, and I'm not getting the same response, and I need to figure out what to do to get back on the victory path, right? Modeling is going to be the same. You're talking about modeling.
Right.
Modeling is the key to both of these, and changing your mindset from thinking I have to create it all to just discover it and get in front of it is so simple but so powerful, and very few people are doing it. Now, why don't you talk about how you can do that today? Because what you did with magazines, you now with AdSense.
Sure,
can do
absolutely. So you go to Google, google.com. You can think of any industry. You know, you can think of toys, right? You can type in something related to that. It could just be the word toys, or it could be, you know, bicycles, whatever else. You type that in, you can see the ads that are running.
Right.
You know, typically if you type something in and don't see any ads, you want to stay away from that market and that idea.
Instead of saying, wow, I found a niche nobody's found, at this stage, every niche that's
let's
useful.
Let's face it, you know, we're, 14, 15 years into the development of the commercial World Wide Web. Sure, there are going to be ideas